All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today is December the 6th, 2023, and this is the meeting of Metropolitan Water District Representatives Caucus and a special meeting to Board of Directors of the West Basin Municipal Water District. Thank you to everyone who's present in the room and online. So with that, let's determine our quorum. EJ Caldwell, Mr. General Manager.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. Director John Deere.
Here.
Director Gloria Gray. Director Gray, are you with us online? Director Harold Williams.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez. President Scott Houston.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Public comment. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak?
President Houston, we have not received any request for public comment today, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there are any members of the public that would like to make public comment, please indicate so now by raising your virtual hand. And President Houston, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Okay, and before we move into discussion items, what I'll do, we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves. Most of us probably know each other, but always good. So we'll start off with Director Williams.
Director Williams, Division 1, West Basin.
I'm Director Houston, Division 4, West Basin.
Director Don Deere, Division 5, West Basin Director.
EJ Caldwell, General Manager, West Basin.
Desiree Quintero, Manager of Administration, Board Secretary, West Basin.
Dimitri Polisos with the Metropolitan Water District.
Shanti Rosette with the Metropolitan Water District.
And Tammy Hurley High with West Basin Water Quality and Resources Department.
Matt Bay, West Basin.
Amy Rocha, West Basin Public Information.
Terry Alex, LA County Water Service District 29.
West Basin with West Basin staff.
Genesis Fernandez with the Water Policy Department at West Basin.
Jennifer Vasquez with West Basin.
Joe Ramos Young, West Basin Public Information.
Cherish Help with West Basin Water Policy Department.
Mel Miranda, West Basin Public Information. Bargain, Australian, West Basin.
Okay, very good, thank you. And I know there's a number of people online, so we're not gonna go through everybody who's online, obviously. Looking to see, I don't know if there's any other board members besides Director Gray online, unless you all see someone I don't.
President Houston, I do see Director Langford joining us.
Very good, yes. Scrolling down. So yes, I see Director Joy Langford with WRD is here. So welcome to her online. Thank you. All right, so with that, we will move forward into our item 4A discussion items, which is water supply conditions. So EJ, introduce that.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. And I want to begin by noting that we do have a number of staff here, both with us personally and then, of course, at their respective desks downstairs. The reason for that is because there's no two better topics, I think, than the ones that we have today, because West Basin Municipal Water District is in the business of delivering imported water to our service area. We are dependent upon it no matter how great of a job we're doing with recycled water. And so when we look at that, we talk a lot about the importance of the State Water Project, as well as our Colorado River water supplies. And so for the first item that we have today is a water supply conditions. And for this presentation, we have Dimitri Polisos, the Team Manager, Water Resource Management Group at Metropolitan Water District.
All right, great. Thank you, EJ, and good morning, everyone. Okay, I think we're up. We're good. All right. Yes. Well, thank you for the invitation to come over and talk about our water supply conditions and the update. We did get some news from the Department of Water Resources a couple of days ago of the initial allocation. So I'll talk about that and a little bit about the outlook as well. And also where we're putting all that water that we gained. Spoiler alert, we are going to be at the highest water reserves in our storage that we've ever had in metropolitan history. So how
Speak just a
little louder?
Yeah, it'll pick up, but we can't hear you.
Oh, I got you.
That's okay.
Yes. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the conditions for 2024. So water year 2024. This is our what we call the 8-station index graphic. What you're seeing here, there's a lot of information. The band, that blue band, kind of illustrates the range of hydrologic conditions we've had in the past. So you, at the bottom edge, you have the driest year, which brought in about 17 inches of precip. And again, this is measured up in Northern California, the Northern Sierra watershed. And that's always a good indication of our water supply conditions on the State Water Project. So on that band, you see at the top edge, there's the wettest year we've had. So a huge range from 17 inches all the way up to 94.7 inches. I believe that was accomplished back in 2017, where we got one of the wettest year, or the wettest year, for the 8-station index. The average line there is that light blue. That's about just over 50 inches of precipitation. Last year, you can see above normal conditions, 66.6 inches. That's that white line. And then where we are today, this is looking at that water year time frame. We're currently at 4.5 inches, and that's well below average at this point. It's still early in the year. A lot can happen. But basically at 48% of normal for this date. And so this is important to take note of, because the initial State Water Project allocation depends on a couple things. One is the precipitation received to date. The other is storage levels in some key reservoirs around the state, that being Oroville and San Luis Reservoir. So given those conditions, the department did release a 10% initial state water allocation. Now, some might think that this is a low allocation because given how wet we were in the previous year. But really, the way the state works, it's a reset really when the next year water year calendar year starts. We did, however, we thought earlier in the year that we would have a little bit better of an initial allocation, because the projections for San Luis Reservoir were to be higher than they're actually going to end up the end of December. And I'll get into kind of why that's the case. But as some more information about that initial allocation, again, it is just the initial. As conditions improve, hydrologic conditions improve, we will see that allocation increase. And their study that discusses the allocations, their initial study showed a range of about 10 to 90% for the year. So basically saying anything's possible going forward this year. We'll know more as we go through the months and we see the conditions develop, the hydrologic conditions develop. All right, so one of the things that they look at when developing that initial allocation is San Luis Reservoir. And what you're seeing here is the actual storage levels in San Luis Reservoir for the calendar year. We're currently at 423,000 acre feet. The state's share is about just over 1 million acre feet. And this is a very different picture of what the department was estimating the reservoir to end the year. And that's what this orange line is. They thought they would be much higher. And that would have led to a much higher initial allocation. And so that's one thing we do see in wet years, that we anticipate the reservoir levels to be a little bit higher, and that would then lead to a healthier initial allocation. But that wasn't the case this year. So you might be asking why. Well, one of the reasons is one of the requirements in the Delta, the San Francisco Bay Delta, is something called X2, fall X2 requirement. Essentially, this is a water quality requirement. What it does is it tries to maintain a suitable habitat for Delta smelt. And so basically trying to keep the water as fresh as possible and keep that salt water away from intruding into the Delta. And so how they do that is they provide a requirement of meeting certain water quality goals, freshness in the water, basically reduced salinity, certain feet or miles, I'm sorry, from the Golden Gate Bridge, or kilometers in this case. And so the requirement is different throughout the year. When we, in the springtime, there's another X2 requirement. But what's hitting us this year and reducing water levels in San Luis Reservoir is the fall X2. And that requirement is 80 kilometers from the Golden Gate. And so on that map there on the right, the Golden Gate is towards the left. North is the top of the page there. So 80 kilometers gets you to this town close to Collinsville. And so basically 2 ways that you can maintain that water quality. You either release more water from Oroville, or you reduce exports, or a combination of the 2. And this year they did a combination of the 2, and you can see there about 300,000 acre feet was released from Oroville and let to go out the bay and into the ocean. And exports were reduced by about 300,000 acre feet. And that's one of the reasons why you see that drop off in storage levels in San Luis. So this requirement, really, we did see an impact, and that impact, negative impact on our initial state water project allocation and the lower levels in San Luis Reservoir. All right, so a little bit about the outlook for the year. I think everyone's heard about El Nino and how that's going to impact us. Well, I can tell you I've been doing this for about 20 years, and El Nino means absolutely nothing when it comes to Northern California. In Northern California, it's really a hit and miss. It's 50-50. I have seen the wettest years and I've seen the driest years, and they were both classified as El Nino. Now in Southern California, however, there's a little bit more, it leans a little bit more on the wet side. So for what that's worth. But what this is showing you here is the outlook for between now, or I guess yesterday, through the 10th of December. And we're not seeing a whole lot of rain. Those darker colors, the reds and the yellows, would indicate a lot more more precip. You're seeing that up in the northeast or northwest, I'm sorry, Pacific Northwest. That's another atmospheric event that's going to be happening this week up there. Unfortunately, it is well north of the Northern Sierra. Unfortunately, there will be some precip in the watershed, the Northern Sierra watershed, and not all that much. The same with the Upper Colorado River. That's the other circle we have there. See if I can point to it. I don't think I can. Yeah, right here, this guy. So some rain, but not a whole lot. It's not going to bring numbers at normal or even above normal at this point, but again, early in the water year, we'll see what happens as things develop. This is more of an outlook, the seasonal outlook. So this is looking out 3 months. On the left, you're looking at precipitation. What you're seeing there is they're projecting currently above normal precipitation for most of the West, certainly California, and also into Colorado River Basin. So that's good news if it does pan out. What's not so good is the graphic on the right, and that's the temperature outlook. And so we're also seeing above normal temperatures. So that doesn't bode well for snowpack development, and that's really what we'd like to see. These flashier rain events, the way the system is certainly in Northern California or the State Water Project really wasn't built to manage an influx of water coming in so quickly. We do like to see a healthy snowpack and a slow melt of that snowpack. That is something more manageable. But with climate change and what we saw in the last couple of years, what we're seeing these more extreme events. And unfortunately, this 3-month outlook is indicating that we may see a lot more rain and a lot less snow this year. So we'll see again how that all pans out. All right, so a little bit about our water supply conditions. It was quite a remarkable year. This is our water supply, 3.18 million acre feet. Quite a difference from the previous year, but that's a lot of water available to us. Demands are about 1.5 million acre feet, which leaves us a lot of water to manage, 1.68 million acre feet. We are able and have identified about 75% of that water, that 1.68, we're able to manage and store. So about 1.2 million acre feet. So I'm going to show you where we're putting all that water. So these are some of our storage programs. This is on the State Water Project side. We've got water we can put in San Luis Reservoir. That's what the State Water Project carryover bucket is, the top left bucket. The second one below that is the State Water Project flexible storage. These are storage reservoirs closer to the region here. So this is Castaic and Lake Paris. And then our in-region storage. So predominantly that's our Diamond Valley Lake, DVL. So you can see in all of those three programs, we were able to significantly increase from where we started the year. And that dashed line indicates where we started, the storage levels when we started the year. So essentially full in all of those programs, or at least as much as we're able to store in those reservoirs. On the top right, these are our what we call our groundwater banking programs in the Central Valley. You'll see there not as much of an increase, and that's basically because they were so wet in the Central Valley. Lake Tulare reappeared. They had so much water, they could not take in any additional water. So that limited our ability to store in those facilities, unfortunately. So that's why you're seeing some increases there, but we were definitely limited because of because of the flooding essentially in that region. All right, so on the Colorado River side, so we've had more issues there with our I call it our equivalent to banking on the state is the desert water in Coachella Valley. This is where we put water into the ground. Well, with the routine maintenance issues there, and also with I guess it was a hurricane, but they downgraded it to a tropical storm. I forget the Hillary, I think it was. That caused some damage and it inhibited our ability to move water into those programs. So in fact, there you're seeing the only storage program this year that we dropped. We weren't able to put water in there because we were limited because of some damage that was caused there. And that's what that top photo is there, that bridge, that basically goes over the wash that we put water through. So obviously they had to stop that operation to be able to repair that bridge. On a positive note, our ICS, intentionally created surplus, our water that we can put in Lake Mead, we're maximizing that and we're putting as much as we can. And Shanti can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have now the most we've ever had in that storage program. So good news on that front. So all in all, 1.18 million acre feet of new supply in our storage programs for us for use should the next year or multiple years, if we see some dry conditions, we're in a very good place. And that's what this map or this graphic indicates. You can see the history there all the way back to 2000. This is our end of year storage balance. The light blue is that sits on top of that darker color that I guess it's dark blue or green, I think. That's our emergency storage, that darker color. And on top of that is our what we call the dry year supply. So supplies available to us. And so we're going to end the year with 3.4 million acre feet of that dry year supply. Of course, not all of that is available. Some of that water's in the ground. Can't pull all of that in a single year, but most of our surface water reservoirs are full. So we're in a very good position going into this next year. I think that's all I have for the water supply update. Happy to answer any questions or clarify anything.
Very good. Thank you, Dimitri. That's an excellent report. Really good news and insightful. Got to be some questions, I'm sure, in here. So, and this is a great chance, even from staff too. But does anybody have any questions for Dimitri or online? Just raise your hand. Start with EJ Caldwell, General Manager, West Basin.
Yeah, thank you, Dimitri. Every time you present, I learn something new. And so I had a question about the 3.4, and you compare that to just a few years ago where we had historic highs of 3.1 and 3.2 in storage. You know, West Basin right now, as far as our sales of imported water, are at an all-time low. I mean, we've achieved things that we never thought really possible. Are you seeing that across the entire Met service area? And where I'm going with this is, you talked about the 3.4, and I think you talked about actually the total demand on the Met system. But how does that 3.4 reflect the demand that you can now supply your customers with what I would assume is significantly declining sales?
It has, and we're seeing that decline in sales and the demand on Met across the board, all agencies. And we've seen that now in the last couple of years. So that water use efficiency and conservation ethic is still, it's still with us. We're not seeing much of a change, even since the time we put together our long-term planning document, the IRP. 2019, 2020 timeframe, we're seeing demands low. In fact, there was a stat that's, I think, the lowest demands we've had since the early 80s. I think that's the right stat. So, and that is across the board. So we're looking at what, 1.1 or so, 1.2 million acre feet of a demand on metropolitan. So when you look at this kind of storage, we estimate that we can get through 2 years of a 5% state water project allocation. So that's where we ran into problems last year, because we had 3 consecutive years of 5%, or 2 consecutive years, and then it finally upped in the last year, but it started at 5, unprecedented. And that caused us to go into that emergency water conservation program for parts of our service area that can only get water from the state water project. There just wasn't enough water. What you're seeing here is good news in that front, that even if we do have a 5% allocation, and already this year we don't, so that's good news. And it's rare that it goes down, the allocation, but we're able to maintain or get through 2 5% years. So that gives you a perspective of how great, having that 3.4 in storage. So you won't, basically my message is you won't be seeing an emergency water conservation program anytime soon.
Thank you.
Very good. Other questions? Mr. Matt Bay.
Yeah, thank you, Dimitri. You talked about the San Luis Reservoir and how you water in there, but due to some of the regulations, some of that water got taken out. Does that impact Metropolitan when that happens? Like when water gets moved out of there, do you lose that water, or how does
Yeah.
that impact?
So water never even made it in there. And so this is a reservoir that the Department of Water Resources and the Central Valley Project, so the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources manage and maintain that reservoir. As a contractor with the State Water Project, we have rights to be able to store water in that reservoir, and that reservoir helps bolster or support the allocations. So when you have a Fall X2 requirement that reduces exports, that is an impact to all the State Water Project contractors. And that's why the initial allocation wasn't, say, 15 or 20%, because we didn't have that additional 300 or so thousand acre feet in that reservoir. So that is an impact to all the State Water Project contractors. And Metropolitan represents the largest piece of the State Water Project contractors. We're about 50% of that. So yeah, it definitely was an impact, but there's plenty of time to reverse that. We just need a couple good storms, and those restrictions throughout the year change. So this is a specifically Fall X2. It's in place in September and October. It's not in place right now. There are other things that are in place, but typically in the January, February timeframe and in the summer months, if we see flows going through the Delta, the department is able to capture that. It's the early springtime that things get really difficult to move water through the Delta. And that's why we like to have a snowpack that releases the snow melt slowly over the late spring and early summer, because that's the time we can actually, the department can move the water through the Delta and fill San Luis.
Very good. Any other questions? I have one or two, and one is Tulare Lake or Lake Tulare. I don't know what the official name is, but that basically is where it really just flooded, right? Is that where? Basically, it was no lake there for a long time, right?
There was no lake there for a long time, and there, in fact, the land was used for farming, and a lot of that land was inundated, and there were some structures there as well. But it basically dried up and has been dry. It did get a little bit of flooding, I believe, in 2017, that one wet year, but this year they saw a lot of water coming in there, and it's just a basin. It just, there's have to wait till it percolates. There's no other way to kind of get that water out.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I saw the pictures, they all good, but I didn't get a chance to drive up there. Has it completely subsided at this point, or do you know?
You know, that's a great question. I was on a Southwest flight, and I whatever reason, sat on the wrong side of the plane, and I could not see it to verify on my trip to Thanksgiving up north. But I'll be back up there in later this month, so I'll see if it's still there. I'm not sure.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify, right?
Let's see. The other question I did have, well, most of our water, I mean, the Metropolitan Report would tell us this, but right now in the SoCal, we still bring most of the water in from Northern California at this point, rather than the Colorado. What's sort of the balance at this moment?
What are the numbers there? It varies from year to year, obviously, because if the state water project allocation is 5%, we can only bring in 100 or so thousand acre feet. So in those years, we depend more on the Colorado River side. But I think the stats are what, 35 and 25?
Yes,
Between the two?
like right now it's 25 and it's for the blend targets.
Okay,
So which numbers, sorry, for
25 for the Colorado.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the blend targets. We try to blend the water. We favor the state water project supplies because of the salinity in the Colorado River supplies when we can. And a year like this, we certainly can. We're very flush with state water project water. So it does change from year to year, but those are basically on average, I guess.
I like to tell people who they at. Water coming from at this moment, it does move, we move it around back and forth depending on the situation. Okay, and then my last question is, and I think our bigger challenge is what's our message going to continue to be to the public? Because right now this is good news. We got very full reservoirs. A lot of people have, taken their foot off the pedal to a degree, going into what the media is predicting is a wet winter. But what is the messaging that us in the water community should be saying to our customers or constituents and so on? But of course, Metropolitan and West Basin and just any of us who work in this industry.
That's the biggest challenge. And to continue we always need to, protect this natural resource. We can't take our foot off the pedal as far as conserving and not wasting water. So whether it's raining outside or not, as a long-term, as a planner, it's great that we have a wet year and whatever the projection is for this year, but things can turn quickly. And so any opportunity we have to reduce our water waste, we need to do that. And I know it's hard for the public to, it's like fatigue when it comes to conserving, but I think there's a difference between conservation, which in my mind is more dealing with a crisis and putting extra measures in place to reduce water use. That's different than reducing water waste. That is an ethic that the public is glomming onto. I'm seeing the demand numbers dropping. That needs to continue. And that's why I think Metropolitan supports the removal of non-functional turf and those things, because we view that as a waste of a resource, a limited resource that we have.
And one makes an important point in terms of the imported supply work that we're doing right now, particularly in the Colorado River, is that when we can model in the municipalities this ethic of improving the standards and having the numbers of per person per capita per day come down, and implementing things like non-functional turf removal or replacement, it does show the other sectors, which are the largest users of water in the Colorado River, that the municipalities are doing their part, and it's time for them to do their part as well. And so it does help in that kind of public relations aspect of it, not just with the consumers, but also, with the other constituencies that rely on the Colorado River, and also with representatives in places like DC.
Excellent points. I like the way you conservation versus water waste. That's a good way to frame it and talk about it. Wow. Well, thank you very much. Biggest challenge, obviously, is just that people can't get too comfortable in these situations. We all know we just came through, so here we are. So thank you, Dimitri, very much. Next item is 4B as in boy, which is our Colorado River update. EJ will introduce that item.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. As we are at this point getting ready for the Colorado River Water Users Association, we thought that there was no better opportunity to bring a presentation related to this matter. So item 4B is our Colorado River update. For this presentation, we have Shanti Rosette, the Colorado River Resources Policy Manager for Metropolitan Water District.
Thank you. And okay. Oh, and I was wondering, should I advance the slides or do you want to? I don't have to. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So, I am going to just start by talking a little bit about the management of the Colorado River, because I'm going to be discussing the recent administrative actions that are being undertaken to address both near and longer term operations of the Colorado River system reservoirs. And the authority to manage those reservoirs is divided. The Bureau of Reclamation owns the dams and operates the reservoirs, and the basin states are the entity that hold the rights to use the water. So there's a split there. And that's part of the reason that the basin states and water providers like Metropolitan are involved in these operational decision-making processes. So Reclamation owns and operates both Glen Canyon and Hoover dams that form Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Those reservoirs are managed consistently with the 2007 interim guidelines, and the interim guidelines include requirements to be operated consistently with the law of the river. Please advance. So it's the 2007 guidelines expire in 2026. And as Dimitri was touching on, it's been a bumpy run up over the last 18 months to where we've gotten to now. Reclamation initiated the process to develop the post-2026 operating guidelines earlier this year. And that was actually later than most of us in the basin were anticipating, in part because they were taking these near-term, relatively emergency reactions that I'm going to talk about later in the presentation that delayed us behind where we thought we were going to be at this point this year. Fortunately, we have been able to shift to the development of the post-2026 guidelines. But in 2022, in the spring, both Lake Powell and Lake Mead felt their lowest elevation since they were initially filled. And that was followed by, in June, the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation calling for Colorado River basin water users to reduce their use of Colorado River water by 2 to 4 million acre feet, which at the time was an eye-popping number. And then Congress took action very shortly after in the Inflation Reduction Act, adopting $4 billion in drought mitigation funding. And after the basin states worked together to address a proposal for how to make cuts consistently with what the commissioner had asked for and weren't able to get there, the Bureau of Reclamation did initiate a process to start a supplemental environmental impact statement last November. This was almost immediately followed by this very wet winter last year, with resulting inflows into the system of 150% or so of average, which added, at this point, it looks like 6 million acre feet to both Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And that significantly reduced the urgency of the situation, and things have we've been able to pivot a bit because of that. Next slide, please. So just giving a little bit of background about how we got here before the last few years. The Colorado River Basin has been in drought since the year 2000. It's often called the Millennium Drought. And during the Millennium Drought period, the inflows into the Colorado River are about 1 million acre feet less than the historical average. And that's very significant because even before that reduction, the basin was pretty much fully developed in its demands. So all of the water that was allocated by the Colorado River Compact and the Mexico Treaty were accounted for with uses. And so this 1 million acre feet less in historical hydrology on average is a significant volume of water and means that people are actually going to have to make reductions and have been already. So lower basin uses and deliveries to Mexico can exceed releases from Lake Powell pursuant to the current guidelines. And this results in declines in Lake Mead over time that don't necessarily have anything to do with hydrology. And in the lower basin, this is what's called the structural deficit. And it's one of the things that we're trying to address in the next set of guidelines. Next slide, please. This is a table, it's a little hard to read in this room, but this is a table that Reclamation included in the most recent draft of the revised SEIS that shows the elevations of both Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Lake Powell's on the top, Lake Mead is on the bottom. And what's important to note for the actions that have happened over the last few years is the steep decline at the end that's in the red circle, is that 2020, 2021, and 2022 had extremely poor runoff into the system. The hydrology was not great, but the runoff was terrible. And that this reduced runoff efficiency has been identified as a trend that may continue by climate scientists who are looking at this with respect to the risks of long-term aridification of the system. And so this is something that planners are going to have to be aware of, and plan around. Next slide, please. So the Bureau of Reclamation issued its draft SEIS in April for the near-term operations, and they made proposals for two action alternatives. One was to make cuts in water uses in the lower basin on a priority system, and the other was on a pro rata basis. The basin states didn't like either of these, and so within a month of when the draft SEIS came out, Arizona, Nevada, and California offered the lower basin proposal as an alternative. And what it proposed to do was create a minimum of 3 million acre feet of new system conservation in 2023 through 2026, providing that at least 1.5 million acre feet of that would be by the end of 2024, and that 2.3 million acre feet of that would be funded through Inflation Reduction Act funding. And we are on track to do that. The Metropolitan Board yesterday just approved a first round Inflation Reduction Act agreements that Metropolitan is participating in, as well as we are being considered for the next round of Inflation Reduction Act funding for the longer term, more durable projects. So that's been a success so far, but just keep in mind that that money, it has to be encumbered by 2026. And so after 2026, new conservation projects will have to be, if they're going to be funded at all by the federal government, it's going to have to be an outside source of funding. There's nothing like the Inflation Reduction Act that I've seen in my career. So this could be a one-time thing. Please.
How much money are you talking about just at Metropolitan?
So the proposals that we have, there are two buckets. It's what's called, there's the bucket one, which is for the short-term projects. And those, we are participating with the Palo Verde Irrigation District and with the Bard Water District. And we also have one with the Quetzon tribe. And I'm sorry that I don't remember like the total numbers off the top of my head, but the amount of reimbursement from the federal government is between $330 an acre foot to $400 an acre foot. And there's an incentive for participating in more years. So if you participate 3 years, you get the $400. If you participate just 1 year, you get the $330. And I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but in the case of the Quetzon tribe, it will mean that Metropolitan will have, instead of the money coming from Metropolitan, it will instead come from the federal government. That will save us about $2 million. In the case of Palo Verde Irrigation District, again, that's money that otherwise we would have to pay. And so there's like millions of dollars that like we're not going to have to pay. We don't get the benefit of being able to use the water, but the water does bolster the system. And as Dimitri said, we're trying to manage our supply anyway right now. And then there's this other bucket, which is with the application is for it's $400 million. We're not sure how much of that is going to be funded, but that was what the application was for.
Yes, bucket number 2.
Bucket number 2. Yes, and that's for it. That's just how they refer to the IRA. Is bucket 1 is for the short term, bucket 2 is for the longer term, more durable projects.
400, but bucket 2, again, it's not just Metropolitan, huh? That could be
Right.
multiple.
Yes. Yes, and we do know that there are other contractors for Colorado River Water in California that are applying for bucket 2 funding, as well as a lot of applications in Arizona.
400 million doesn't go really far. In some
It doesn't, right?
Not that I'm bashing it.
Right, right. We'll take it. We'll take it. Happy that we're being considered.
Thank you.
And so, yes, and so we can go to the next slide. So this year is a record-setting year for conservation in the lower basin. In 2023, Arizona, Nevada, and California are on track to voluntarily conserve 1 million acre-feet of water. And just to pull out some of the numbers there, Arizona is using about 2 million acre-feet of its 2.8 million acre-foot allocation. Nevada is using 186,000 acre-feet of its 300,000 acre-foot allocation. And California is using less than 700,000 acre-feet, or more than 700,000 feet less than it's entitled to. And as noted on the slide, that's the lowest amount of California deliveries from the Colorado River since 1949. And in Metropolitan, it's the 3rd lowest year in 60 years. And that's given even that we had to rely more on the Colorado River in the earlier part of this year because things were so dry on the state side until after the winter. So we are well on track. And I guess an advanced slide. Do I have another slide? No, that's it. So we are well on track to meeting the goal of the lower basin's proposal to conserve 1.5 million acre-feet by the end of next year. And the basin states are in discussions about developing the next set of guidelines. There is right now an intent among the 7 states to develop a consensus proposal. And what this is primarily a proposal about how the reservoirs will be operated, releases from Lake Powell, and how shortages will be divided in the lower basin. And part of that is like that we're trying to work out right now is how to address the structural deficit in the lower basin, and also what's the right points in the reservoir to keep elevations so that we avoid the risk of critical reservoir elevations. I think that a lot of folks in the upper basin were spooked by those 3 years when the Lake Powell seemed to be doing fine to it falling within 35 feet of power pool in just a 3-year period of time. So there's a balancing act there, and you know how it works and how successful we are in part depends on what the hydrology assumptions you have are. And there is quite a bit of uncertainty right now, but Reclamation has issued the 5 hydrologies that it intends to use to analyze the alternatives that are going to be part of the post-2026 EIS. So at least we have an idea what to look at. And they're going to be using one that tries to replicate a wetter hydrology, what it's been over the last 30 years, which is also wet in comparison to what it's been over the last 20 years. And then 2 of the more dry climate change scenarios. So we'll get a full range of looking at how things might operate. And it should be no surprise to anybody that the system operates less well under the drier scenarios. It gets much more difficult in situations. But we're engaged in that work. That work is going to continue through the spring. The Bureau of Reclamation anticipates issuing a draft EIS in the December of next year. And that would be followed next in the 2025, early 2025 is when I anticipate the implementation agreements would come before the boards, like the Metropolitan Board would then have to consider the implementation agreements. And we'll also have on a parallel track the development of the next minute for the Mexico Treaty that would establish the shortages that Mexico would have to share it. And that's concludes my update. Any other questions?
Very good, thank you. Shanti, questions?
No, thank you. Great report.
Oh, I see a hand raised. And by the way, I didn't see him earlier. Director Lefebvre, I think, is with us. So Director Lefebvre, go ahead.
Shanti, can you explain a little bit about what's going on with Imperial? I don't, the numbers that I read about didn't seem like they were what they signed up to. There was, they agreed with 100,000 acre feet conservation in 2023, but then they said they were going to make it up to, I guess, 800,000 acre. Anyway, I'm lost. Do you know what's going on?
Yeah, yes, Director Lefebvre. They, so because the Inflation Reduction Act agreement didn't get finalized in time for 2023, they're going to use some of the conservation that they did this year to help meet the goal that would have been met with the that money. But they are anticipating that they're going to be bringing to their board for the 2024, 2025, and 2026 years next spring, or I guess in the winter, in February was what I've heard, an agreement that would commit to up to 250,000 acre feet each of those years. So from what they're representing to us and to Reclamation, they're going to be on track to meet the commitments that they had offered earlier in the year.
So they're going to increase in the out years to cover their semi shortfall in 2023, I guess.
So their underuse this year is, as of last week, 262,000 acre feet. So they've done a significant amount of conservation or underuse already this year. And I expect, based on the accounting, that they'll be able to show that they've met their goal.
And they're making a lot of, or some significant fraction of their conservation by not sending water to San Diego, I guess, too. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions? Matt?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Shanti. I know you talked to, or there's been some media coverage lately about how kind of the next couple of years are going to be handled through kind of providing funding to these irrigation districts and, the farmers to kind of do what they've been doing in the past. But I heard you mention durable, long-term project a couple times. Are you able to speak to and identify what those are, or is that still kind of in the planning process?
It's in the planning process, but for Metropolitan, and we haven't, Reclamation treats these as as proprietary information until they grant the applications. And so we don't see other entities' applications. They may describe them to us a bit, but we don't see them. They're not public yet. But for Metropolitan, we're looking at, different categories of projects, like enhancing the AVEC groundwater banking, potentially looking at non-functional turf replacement is one of the biggest of the categories. And then local projects where the the member agencies would be able to apply if they have specific projects that they would like to fund. So those are the kind of big buckets within our bucket too, I guess, that we're looking at Metropolitan and have proposed in the IRA application.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Great questions and exciting time in a lot of ways. Very challenging, but an exciting time for those of us in water. It's also been interesting to see some of the topics that grew up. So with that, we have one more item on this agenda, and that is 4C as in cat. I'm going to go ahead and let EJ introduce that item.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. This item should not take too long. At a recent task force meeting for the Camp for Water staff presentation, Metropolitan Water District presented their climate decision-making framework support tool. And they did it in the middle of a committee meeting. I was watching virtually and I was extremely impressed. Metropolitan Water District does an excellent job of providing member agency services and really working with the individual member agencies. And I thought that this was something that not only our board should see, but also the West Basin staff and team, as well as our guests. So I asked the person that presented this item to come in and speak to this. And of course, it's Dimitri. So I'll throw it over to you for this presentation.
Yes, sorry, you're stuck with me again for this, but yeah, so this tool was developed as part of the Camp for Water process. That's our climate adaptation master plan for water, as EJ mentioned. And really the reason for it is there was a desire from our board that the board members and the member agencies better kind of get more familiar with each other's challenges and opportunities. And so what the data behind all of this information that you're going to see here is really supply data, demand data, and population data. And it's presented in different ways here that you can do comparisons and you can walk through the various agencies. You can average across years. You can look at it holistically, all the member agencies together or in individual agencies. It's still in beta form. We do plan to release this first one right after the next task force meeting. So about December 19th or the 20th, we will have this available for you all to play around with, as I have been for the last couple of weeks. But the reason why I really appreciate this process and this coming together is because this is the data that my team and I work with on a day-to-day basis. This is the information that we use to develop our long-term planning documents. So this focuses on historical information and goes all the way back to 1980, and it's up to current 2022. So we have that, that many years of data in here. The next version of this is going to then show us the projections that we have in the 4 IRP scenarios. So you're going to see past history of all the agencies. You can look at each of the agencies and then you can see how we're projecting out demands and local supplies for each of the agencies based on the assumptions we made for the IRP scenarios. And all this information is possible because of basically all of the member agencies. We work with each agency every year. We do these annual surveys that look to verify past information, past data, and also work with you to project out your plans for local supply production. And so all that information, we work with you all and This tool is a way of really demonstrating all that stuff. And again, we're not 100% there. We're going to put in the projections in here, and that's going to roll out early next year. But I can walk through some of the information here, and kind of you can get familiar with what you can do with this. So I think maybe what we do is we'll start with the top left, where you have the map of the member agency of the service area, metropolitan service area. And what you can do is hover over any of the agencies and you'll get a pop-up box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here. Let's zoom in and hover over West Basin and see. Do it this way. Try to get this as big as possible for you all to see. All right, select West Basin. And then you'll see your outline of your service area. And if you hover, you'll be able to get some basic information. And so the information that we're showing in the pop-up box is right now we selected the date range of 1980 to 2022. So all the information you're going to see in here is averaged for that time frame. And I know it's difficult to read, but I'll just walk through what's in here. What's in here is population, local supply averaged over those years, met supply. So this is the amount of water that you average over this time that you've taken from metropolitan. By the way, local supply is about 52,000 averaged over this time frame. Met supply is 145,000 acre feet. And it has your demand in here, and that looks like 197,000 acre feet. The other bits of information we have is your GPCD data. So total GPCD and potable GPCD. So the difference there is for the potable GPCD, we take account the recycled water that you have all developed and credit you for it and not penalize you for it. So basically your average potable GPCD during this time frame, 183, and your total GPCD is 224. Now this is average, so those numbers really don't make much sense. So what I'm going to do is, or it's not as meaningful, I'm going to show you where you were back in 1980 for those two parameters and compare that with today. So what I did there is I slid the date range to just show 1980 values. And if I hover over your service area on the left, you'll see pop up. Yeah, so you'll see there your potable GPCD back in 1980 was 223. But if we fast forward to the most current bit of data that we have, you'll see, I'm assuming, a very big improvement or a drop in that GPCD. And sure enough, your GPCD today, potable, at least in 2020, is dropped down to 132 gallons per person. So that went from, and so you'll see in the bottom right, that's a quicker way of looking at the data across time. You can, I've selected the date range of 1980 to 2022. So that's what you're seeing in those charts on the right. So I'm looking at the bottom graphic because it shows GPCD against population. And so a couple things you're seeing here is as population has increased in your service area, your GPCD has decreased. And you can hover over this time frame and get all that data. So 132 is today, but if I go back to 1980, what was it again? 200 something, 223. So you can see that kind of drop in GPCD. And that's pretty much the case for many of the member agencies, and you can go through them as you like, and you'll see that. Not all agencies, but a predominant amount, you'll see that kind of drop. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. Up in this top right box here, this is a graphical representation of basically total local supply, which is the blue shaded region, versus the supplies you receive from metropolitan, which is the green. So this is a way of indicating or showing your dependency on metropolitan. And again, we're just focused in on West Basin right now, but you can glide over this and you can see back in, let's go to 1990. In 1990, you basically were taking about 82% of your water was from metropolitan. The remainder was the local supplies that you were that developed at that time. But if you fast forward to today, or I'm sorry, I keep saying today, but it's 2020. That's the latest information we have. I'll try to hover over this. Let me get this little box out of the way. All right. So if you hover over it in 2022, you'll see that dependency from 80% drop down to 60, I think it's 69%. So again, more things that you can do with this information. If you're curious about your agency, you can look at that. You can select any agency and look at all of them, all the data is in there. Let's talk about these donut graphics here. This donut graphic, basically what that's showing you is where that water went to. What was the demand type? And so there's three categories. It's consumption, replenishment, and ag. And so what you're seeing here, what the donut is representing is that time frame again from 1980 to 2022. That's just what I selected. You can select any time frame, but this will tell you on average what it's showing us is 12% of your demand across that period was replenishment demand, and predominantly the remaining 88% was consumptive use. If we just looked at a single year, and if you want to shout out a year, I can show it to you and really test this tool live here. But I'm selecting 2022, and you can see that replenishment demand dropped down to 8%. So you can make quick comparisons on average, or you can go back at certain years and compare years. But that's some of the things you can do with the tool. We're working on modifying this. We'd like to put in, because we do have the data, a similar donut that talks about, it shows where the source of supply was from. And so that you'll get specific, on the left or one side, you have where the water went to, what demand type it was satisfying. And then at the same time, you'll be able to see side by side what kind of water was used. Was it recycled water? Was it groundwater? Was it water from Metropolitan or what have you? So a lot of information in here. And I think as you start looking into this and digging into this, you can see what supplies are available to each of the member agencies. It's very different. The magnitude of their demands and their supplies. And you'll see across the region, very different. Each agency is very, very unique. What I was showing at the task force, and we may not need to do it here, but you can see from this information how the dependency of the various agencies has changed over time, how some agencies have been constant over time, some agencies constant at higher magnitudes than others, and how agencies are on and off depending on their local supply issues. For example, Santa Monica, one of the examples I showed with Santa Monica was dealing with their MTBE issues. They and what's typically what we see is when agencies have issues with their local supply, they then shift that supply onto Metropolitan. And so then we stepped in and provided that supplemental supply for a period of 12, 13 years or so until they were able to get their groundwater wells back online. And you'll see that on these charts of that kind of pattern of use. And then there's other agencies like Los Angeles, dependent on the hydrologic conditions in the Eastern Sierra with their LA aqueduct supplies. You'll see that they can swing dramatically on Metropolitan from year to year. Very, very different than some of the other agencies that are constant. So all of those challenges and opportunities, whether it's supply opportunities or challenges with their own supply development, you can start gleaning that kind of information off of with this tool. And again, this is focused on historical. We are working to put the scenarios, the IRP scenarios on this, and you will be able to see the launching point, which is the same 2019 conditions for all the agencies, their supply output at that time and their demands at that time. And you'll see how each scenario kind of launches from that point into the future. And each scenario, very different assumptions in each scenario. We did work with all the agencies to get information about what type of projects would you plan on implementing in a future with climate change, in a future with less climate change, in a future with higher demands, in a future with lower demands. All of that were captured in the scenarios, and you'll be able to see that when we roll that dashboard out. So I don't want to take too much of the time, but if there's more specific things you want to look for and test this, I'm happy to run through it. Up to you guys.
That was perfect for me, and I think for the team. If the directors have any questions, I'm sure he's happy to answer.
I don't have any other questions right now.
No, thank you.
Very good presentation.
I think you mentioned it's in beta form, so it's, when do you think it's gonna be completed?
Yeah, the member agency dashboard, this is one of 2 or 3 dashboards that we're developing, but this one will be ready and out live for folks to play around with starting probably around the 20th, December 20th, right after the next task force for the Camp for Water task force. So we're just cleaning up some things in here, making it more user-friendly, more intuitive.
Oh, it looks really, really cool to me, quite frankly, so I'm looking forward to understanding it and learning how to toggle it on our own, let alone staff. It's a great tool for y'all, so. All right, well, thank you very much, Dimitri, much appreciated. And thanks to everybody for being here and due diligence and patience. So it's been a good conversation. So with that, item 5 is director's comments or future agenda items. And I defer to my colleagues. Does anyone have a comment?
Thank you, Dan. Great presentation.
Director
No
Gray.
comment. Great presentations also, but no comments. So thank you for the information.
Very good. Director Duke. All right. And I will echo that as well. These are excellent presentations and very timely in the midst of transition into the winter months as well as the tour conference coming up. Issues on our Sierras and system. So by the way, I think it's good too because our staff, a lot of them here and are some of our interns. So it's really good for them to hear and understand, realize what we're all talking about in these meetings and let alone as agencies. So thank you all for being here. All right, with that, according to our agenda, our next scheduled meeting is to be on January 3rd of 2024. And so with that, we're adjourned.